Good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov. Good to see you all, and welcome to our Parsha class, Sunday morning Parsha, the Parsha of Behar. Okay, L'chaim, L'chaim. So, the Parsha of Behar in Leviticus, in the English Gutnick edition, on page 811. And it's a shorter Parsha, and it deals with some various laws um, in regards to agriculture and real estate in Israel. The opening of the Parsha deals with the idea of the sabbatical year. Every seventh year in Israel, farmers take a break. They let the land sit idle for a year, and they don't work the land. And this is practiced till today. Till today in Israel, um, 2 years ago was a sabbatical, a Shemitah year, and you could drive around Israel, where pretty much everywhere there's farming and agriculture, and this field, wherever you go, you'll see sometimes signs on a field. This field is keeping Shemitah, and Hashem says, "Don't worry, we'll take care of you. You'll have an abundance in the sixth year, and it'll be enough for the seventh and the eighth, and even for the you'll have enough. Don't worry about it. You'll have enough." The idea of trusting in Hashem, that ultimately our livelihood comes from Hashem, and Hashem, we do our part. So taking a year off is like taking a Shabbos off every week. Same idea, and Hashem takes care of you. So that's the opening of the parsha, the first few verses. A big section in the middle of the parsha deals with the purchase of real estate in Israel and how that works, because it affects it has to do with the Jubilee year, right? Every 50th year, 7 times 7 is 49. The 50th year is a Yovel, the Jubilee, and there's various laws pertaining to land ownership in Israel, where if you buy a piece of land, it really returns to its original owners during the years of Jubilee. So the value of the land is really only based on how many more years do we have left to the Jubilee year, right? So if we're year one of the cycle, so it's a 50-year purchase. It's almost like a 50-year lease. So the value is a lot higher. If we're in year 45, it's only a 5-year lease. So it's the value is a lot less. So that is various laws in regards to buying and selling homes and land in Israel is in this week's parsha, and we have some other ideas about the law of not taking interest and things like that in this week's parsha as well. But I want to focus on two verses in this week's parsha that really talk about honesty, how we have to be honest in business, and sensitivity to others. And the reason why I chose these verses to elaborate and discuss today is because we've been mentioning the last few weeks that on the Jewish calendar we are in the days of Sephirah, the days between Passover and Shavuos. It's the days that we are somewhat mourning. We're in a little bit of a sad period in the Jewish calendar because of the 24,000 sages, the 24,000 students of the great Rabbi Akiva, who have perished, and they died in the short few weeks through a plague because they lacked proper respect that was expected of them. They didn't respect each other properly. And therefore, there was this terrible plague. And what we have to remember, especially during these times, is to add in our respect, in our love, in our relationship with others. And in this week's verse, we have a verse, a mitzvah, that talks about how we have to do that, how sensitive we must be to another person, not embarrassing another person, etc. So we'll read these verses inside. Okay, so we'll start with verse chapter 25, verse 14. Verse 14. We're on page 815 in the Gutnick Chumash. If you have a different Chumash, you're following along. Chapter 25 of Leviticus, verse 14. This verse introduces to us or discusses the idea of being honest with when we're selling the piece of land based on the years, how many years left to the Jubilee. Verse 14. When you make a sale to your fellow Jew, or make it purchase from the hand of your fellow Jew. So if you are selling or if you're buying, you should not cheat one another. In other words, you got to be honest in business. You got to be honest. You can't cheat them. Now, everything in Jewish law has a definition. What is the definition of cheating? So, in regards to buying and selling, the Torah gives us a very specific definition, and that is up to a sixth, which means if there's a certain price, if there's a market value, and I charge a person who is unaware of the market value, and I'm charging them up to a fifth of the price of the value of then it's still considered fair game. It's business. So if the market value of a certain item is $100, and I sell it to you for $120, so it's a fifth, right? 20%, a fifth more than its value, more than the market value. So then we say, you know what? Okay, it's normal to have to charge a little more. It's not a big deal. But if I charge a sixth or more, 16% more. So if I charge you, what's the price? I'm sorry. You're right. I'm backwards. Thank you, Lance. If it is less, if it's a six, I'm sorry, my math is also like in here. A six is 16%, right? So if I charge you less than 16% more than the value, so I charge you $115 or less, then the sale is still final and it's okay, it's allowed. But if I charge you a sixth or more, if I charge you 116.66 or higher, then it's considered cheating. It's considered oina'ah, as the Torah says, and the buyer could come back to the seller and say, "Listen, I was unaware that the value is $100, and you charged me more than a sixth. Sorry, I'd like to return the item." And according to Jewish law, he must take the item back. And the same thing works vice versa, right? We say we buy or sell. If I sold the item for $16 less than the value, 16% less than the value, a sixth less than the value, because I was unaware of what the value was. I thought that the value of this item is $84, and meanwhile it's really $100, and I charged you $80, and later I found out, wait, I undercharged them. So I have a right to go back and say, listen, I made a mistake. I didn't realize the value is a lot higher. I have a right to take it back. So it works for the buyer and the seller. That is considered oina'ah. It's a basic halacha, a law in buying and selling. You have to be honest. Which, by the way, how does this apply in the contemporary times, where the value of something, it fluctuates? It's like depends where you're buying it, and there's always an overhead. And if I'm buying the same exact item, I could buy a pair of pants, the same exact same pair of pants. I can buy it in a very an upscale a store in an upscale mall that has a lot of overhead, the rent of the store and the employees or whatever, the customer service, everything that goes with it costs money. So I'm paying a premium. I can find the same exact pair of pants and I buy it on eBay and I can pay half the price, right? So what's the market value for an item? right, all the exactly the shopping experience and the customer service and the location, that's all part of the price, right? When the seller is deciding on how much to charge for a certain item, they take that into account, or they should, right? Someone has much, right? You can buy a bottle of soda if you buy it in the airport, or if you buy it, on the street somewhere, or if you buy it in Walmart. I mean, everything's different, right? It's the same exact item, but where you're buying it and buying experience and everything is part of the price, part of the price. So how does this apply? So the truth is, it seems like it definitely fluctuates. It's not as set in stone today how this halakha applies. There are certain things that have a market value, like if you're purchasing a car, for example, where like there's this the what's called the Kelly Blue Book, where pretty much it's accepted to kind of follow more or less. This is the value. So maybe it's not exactly six. You also have that. There's also services, and you can maybe pay a premium if you have a better, more reliable place to buy it. But if it's something which is way out of the market value, right? You say this car is worth 25,000. They're not going to charge you 60,000 because I'm unaware, I'm an uneducated buyer. That's something which you could say, you know what, according to Jewish law, this is not allowed. Just because you were able to pull out that money from someone, it's not right, and a person has a right to come back and say, I would like my item back. I don't know how this applies in secular American law, if there's any types of gouging and things like that, how it works. But this is the Jewish law. You have to be honest in business. Just because you're able to charge more doesn't mean it's allowed. There's someone over here who was working in a certain type of industry where they were famous for basically totally you know the prices were way above the value, and sometimes they would even kind of gauge the customer, how much are they willing to buy and to pay for it, and they would decide the price based on that. It was very, I would think, very like an unethical type of business where there was no set price. This item, well, it depends on my feeling how much you're willing to pay for it. If I feel like you're someone that's going to pay a lot for it, I'll charge you triple the amount. If I feel like this person is, not really going to pay that much, I'll charge them a lot less. So every customer had a totally, one person paid $50 for an item, and the next person could be paying for the exact same item. They'll pay $300 for it just because I'm able to do that, pull that money out of them. And this person came to me a number of years ago and said, as the kind of getting more involved and trying to, he was learning and studying, and he came across this idea of not cheating and being honest in business. He was asking me, he says, this is the like the structure of our business. This is how we work. But is it right? Seemingly it's wrong. And he made a lot of changes to his business based on this thing that you have to have a market. You have to charge roughly similar to the market value. You could charge a little more. You could have you make a little of a higher profit, but you can't just because you're able to pull out the extra couple of bucks from someone, that's not necessarily allowed. So that is point number one. Yeah, yeah.
You go to the next one, they give you a low price. He says, I'll give it to you for 10. I'll give it to you for 8. I'll give it to you for 5. You're not doing it.
Right. So yeah. So Lance is pointing out maybe you shouldn't be even doing business with if someone is not honest. But you also have to throw into the mix that today generally people are much more educated, and people know that there are different prices. Like most people, they know that there's someone on the street selling you something, selling you some sunglasses. You know that like the price is just whatever came to the mind, and you could maybe like you could. People have access to the internet today, right? You go into you go anywhere and you see a price, you could just do a quick Google search and see, is this something which is a reasonable price or is it totally out of market value? So the idea of cheating and not being honest in business is really talking about someone who is unaware. right? They think that this is the value. So like the peddlers on the streets who are selling you, I think people know that what they're selling it to, and you probably get it somewhere else for a lot cheaper or what. Like so that's all part of it, right? If we know that this is the price and you're willing to pay for it, so maybe it's not. Is it the most ethical thing? That's another question. But does it fit into this definition of onaa, which is like cheating in business? Not necessarily. Okay. Now I want to jump to verse a few verses further. We have a similar verse, and that is hmm, I'm sorry, right over here, the same page, verse 17. So in the Hebrew, verse 17 is almost identical to verse 14. Now, thank you to the Gut Chumash, because I see in their translation, they translated based already on how the Talmud and Rashi interpret this verse. So we have the interpretation in the translation. As I always say, every translation is an interpretation. It's a commentary because you can't translate without understanding the meaning behind it, right? So here's a good example where you have a verse in Hebrew, which we use almost the same language as the previous verse, but it's redundant. So we already translate it based on the interpretation. Verse 17 reads as follows. Velo soinu ish es amisai. You should not, we use the word, the same word as previously, soinu or tainu, which means to cheat. Don't cheat. Don't deceive another person. You should fear God. Because I am your God, your God. So, right, in verse 14, we also said, you should not cheat and deceive another person. In verse 17, we repeat almost the same words. So Rashi over here comments that here we are referring to a different type of deceiving, a different type of cheating. And that is harassment, verbal harassment, deceiving someone with your words. In verse 14, we are referring to deceiving someone in business. And here we're talking about deceiving someone with your words. And we give a few examples. What does it mean not to deceive someone in words? So we mean to deceive, we also mean to harass, to embarrass. It's all included in this mitzvah. How careful we have to be with the way we speak to another person. So the Talmud gives a few examples of what things that we should not say, we should not mention to another person. In business, for example, how often do we go into a store and we look at the price, or we ask someone, hey, how much does this cost? But in our mind, we have no intention to buy it. Zero intention to buy it. Why are we asking? Whatever, we're curious. Or the Talmud says it is forbidden to deceive a person with your words, that they should get excited and say, "Oh, we have a buyer over here." But you had no intention to buy. You're asking for the price not because, oh, if it is a good price, I'll buy it. If not, I won't buy it. No, either way, I'm not planning on buying it. At least not from this person. I'm just asking for the price. That's called deceiving someone with your words. Interestingly, how does this apply in contemporary times? It's another question, because today people are used to it. People know that people come for the price and they're not planning to buy. Especially how often do we go into a store and we look at the item, we could hold it, we could feel it, we could touch it, we could see the price, and then where do we buy it? Go online. But it's a little bit cheaper online. So we walk into Best Buy to look at this device. Now I was able to see it. I see how it looks. Okay, now I'll go online and buy it from not bestbuy.com. I'll buy it from Amazon. Is that allowed? Right? You're using our store. You're coming in and we're getting excited. Oh, it's a busy day in the store. Look, so many people are coming and fiddling around with our merchandise. We're gonna make some good sales. Meanwhile, what? We didn't even have the intention to buy it. We just went for that reason. So it's a question, but definitely something that the Talmud discusses. Don't deceive someone even just with your words. Side note, we were once it's not like something that we did, but this we were once traveling in the yeshiva. We had a full bus of yeshiva boys traveling from Toronto to New York, and we stopped on the way to the rest area. And the rest area had, I think, a McDonald's or Burger King, or it had a restaurant, fast food restaurant. And we all went, we're all yeshiva boys. We're not going to buy any food from there. But we went in to use the restroom too. Maybe I think we were praying afternoon prayer and whatever, just to stop a little bit to run around a little bit. And we hear the chef telling the employees as the bus starts to unload, he says, "Oh, it's a full bus load. Put up 50 burgers." And we felt bad because the whole bus load, they weren't going to sell even one burger. We went over to the guy and said, we'll probably buy some drinks, but we're not going to buy any burgers. Just letting you know. So you get a lot of foot traffic in the store, and you think, oh, we'll make some sales today. Well, if you had no intention to buy, it may be questionable. You've got to allow. But in addition to that, we also talk about the sensitivity, how we have to speak to another person. For example, it says if someone had a history where they're not so comfortable with that history, whether the history is, let's say someone has some time in prison, they made some poor decisions in life, and they ended up in trouble. But now they're, thank God, a better person. They've moved past that. So you tell them, hey, Bob, I remember when I came, you were in prison. I remember those days. Don't mention it. If they don't bring it up, you're not supposed to mention those days. If someone, from a religious standpoint, the Talmud says, if someone becomes a Baal Tshuva, someone who wasn't living a Jewish life and decides, okay, I'm changing my life. Now I'm becoming a good Jew. I'm following the Torah mitzvahs, becoming observant. You're not supposed to mention and say, hey, I remember before you were coming to synagogue. I remember before you were involved. Don't mention it. You shouldn't mention a person's past. If someone's a convert, it says, someone's a convert to Judaism, you shouldn't mention their previous life, lifestyle that they lived. Now they've converted to Judaism. Great, we're happy that they're here. And now don't mention their past. If someone's parents weren't maybe living up to a moral lifestyle, don't mention it. These are examples that the Talmud says how sensitive we have to be with the words. This is all part of this mitzvah, not to deceive another person with your words. And as we translate here, not to harass a person, not to mention certain sensitive topics to a person, which may make a person a little bit uncomfortable. It's not just part of the general mitzvah of Ahavat Yisrael, love your fellow as yourself, which is obviously a very inclusive and very general mitzvah. But the Torah specifies this mitzvah specifically: be sensitive and careful with your words that you use to another fellow, to another person. Embarrassment to embarrass the person is something taken extremely serious in Judaism. What happens when a person gets embarrassed? They turn color, they turn red. The Torah goes so far to say that someone who embarrasses another person does not have a portion in the world to come. It's on the same severity, it's the same seriousness as murder. We would compare it to murder. How do we know this? So going back to Genesis, the story of Yehuda. Remember the story where after he suggested to sell his brother Joseph, and after they realized what a terrible idea this was, and how how painful this was for their father Yaakov, they turned to Yehuda and they said, listen, ultimately it's your fault. Because you suggested that we sell him. If it wasn't for you, we would have taken him out of the pit and we would have returned him to our father. It's your fault. So they got really upset with him. So he kind of left. He moved away, took some time off from his brothers. This is the story in Genesis. The story goes where he gets married, and he has three boys: Er, Onan, and Shelah. And he finds a suitable match for his oldest son, Er, marries a wonderful woman by the name of Tamar. Tamar, right? And Er dies without any children. The oldest son dies. And so, as there's the idea of Yibum, um, Tamar gets married to the second son, Onan. And Onan also dies. So now Yehuda is a little nervous about Tamar marrying Shelah, the third son. So Yehuda says, you know what? He's young. We're waiting. Not for now. For now, he's not getting married. And Tamar moved away. The story goes where Tamar hears that Shelah is already a suitable age to get married, and she's not being called for. So she decides to put Yehuda in his place. We know that Yehuda was traveling, and she dressed up like a harlot. Yehuda had a relations with Tamar, not knowing who she was, and he gives her as as payment his staff, his stick, and his seal, and he leaves. And what happens is a few months later, there's a rumor goes out. Oh, you heard Tamar, daughter-in-law of Yehuda, is pregnant, and she's obviously pregnant. She's not married, right? So what a terrible sin she has committed, and that's it. We got to punish her, and the punishment at the time was capital punishment, right? You got to kill her, and she had a choice to make. She knew exactly who impregnated her. So what would any normal person do? I say, Yehuda, you're sending people to kill me. This is the story, right? You're part of the story over here. But she didn't do that. What does she do? As she was being led to her death, she sends a message to Yehuda and says, here's the staff and the seal. Whoever this belongs to, stop mentioning a name. Whoever this belongs to, this is the person who lived with me, impregnated me. When Yehuda got it, he obviously got the message. So right away he said, she's correct. Don't kill her. It was me. And she was upset with me because she didn't marry Shelah. So what does the Talmud say? That we learn from Tamar. What do we learn from Tamar? We learn how serious it is to embarrass someone. That Tamar was willing to be killed. She was willing to lose her life just in order not to embarrass Yehuda. She was taking a gamble because Yehuda could have ignored it, said, okay, no, it's between me and her. No one knows, right? And I don't know who this belongs to, and that's it. And move on. She's dead, and we move on with life. Yehuda had the courage to say, no, it was me. But she took that gamble. She took that chance because she knew that embarrassing someone is equivalent to killing someone. When that rush of blood comes to the face, it's like the person is bleeding to death. That's how serious it is. And that's brought down in the Talmud, that this is a lesson for us to be sensitive with the words that we say and to the words that we tell another person. This is a story with one of the great Lithuanian rabbis known as the Chafetz Chaim, who really spoke a lot about being careful with the way we speak, not to embarrass other people, not to gossip. So he was once visiting a home for Shabbos. And Friday night, Shabbat dinner. So what's the custom? Friday night. How do we set the table on Friday nights? We have the challah on a challah board. And what do we place on top of the challah? A cover. Why do we cover the challah? You ever, you, you ever wonder that, right? Why do we cover the challah? We make kiddush. We have a challah cover. We finish kiddush. We wash our hands. We uncover the challah. And we eat the challah. Why are we covering the challah? So, like Lance mentioned, for the challah not to get embarrassed. We don't want to embarrass the challah. Okay, why would the challah be embarrassed? So we got to give a little Jewish halakha, Jewish law over here. The Shulchan Aruch talks about when we sit down for a meal. Besides for the meal, all the food is supposed to being kosher. There's also a certain order of things. What foods a person is supposed to eat first, and it applies for bread, for example. That when there's bread on the table, you're supposed to eat the bread first. We wash our hands and we eat the bread, and then we eat the rest of the meal. So really, bread, challah, should be the first thing we start with on a Friday night meal. But because we have this special mitzvah that was supposed to sanctify the day on a cup of wine, we are supposed to make kiddush on a cup of wine. So the cup of wine comes first. But the challah says, hey, wine with you, I'm challah, I come first. So that's why we cover the challah, not to embarrass the challah that the challah's not going first. We make a kiddush on the wine, and then we eat the challah. That's what the Shulchan Aruch said. The Code of Jewish Law tells us the reason why we cover the challah. So the Chafetz Chaim, this great rabbi, is in the home, and beautifully set table, some guests and host and hostess are there. Everyone's happy and smiling and dressed beautifully for Shabbos. And the host comes to the table, and he notices that the challah is not covered. His wife forgot to bring the challah cover to the table. And he's all nervous. Great rabbi's here. He's going to think that he's an ignoramus. He doesn't know he's supposed to cover the challah. So he shouts at his wife. He says, Ginendo, you forgot to cover the challah. This is her. She gets all embarrassed. She's ashamed. Oh, I'm sorry. She runs to the kitchen. She quickly comes with the challah cover. She covers the challah. So the Chafetz Chaim turns to this man and says, tell me, what's the reason why we cover the challah? He said, of course I know. He's like all proud. Yeah, it says clearly, he quotes exactly where it says, supposed to cover the challah, not to embarrass the challah. He says, think about it. The challah is just challah. I mean, it has no feelings. And we're still supposed to be so sensitive not to embarrass the challah. Your wife. What's with this? You're embarrassing your wife in order not to embarrass the challah. What are you thinking? We have to be extremely, extremely sensitive. This is what we learn from Tamar. This is what the verse says. We're repeating it again. We have business transactions. You can't cheat. You can't deceive. But then it's also with our words. We have to be careful with our words, not to be insensitive to another person. Another amazing story in this topic. One of the great Hasidic rabbis from the dynasty of Vizhnitz was once walking home from shul one day with his secretary, and they walked by a watch store, a jewelry store, a store that sold watches, and this was someone from his community. And he says, "I want to buy a watch for my wife," which was kind of uncharacteristic for the rabbi himself to come to the store to look for. He could have, maybe he was a prestigious rabbi. He could have asked them to come to his home to show him some watches. Maybe he wasn't regularly buying watches for his wife. Okay, it was a sound a little off, but okay. He's asking, look at this watch, that watch. He wants a nice watch for his wife. And finally, they decide, okay, I think this is the watch. This is the watch that they're going to buy. So he says, I don't know. I want to ask your wife's opinion. The owner, the salesperson's wife was in the back. And says, let me ask her. I want a woman's opinion about this wife, about this watch that I'm buying for my wife. So she's called out, and the rabbi asks, the wife of the store owner, tell me, what's your opinion about this watch? And she gives her opinion, and they buy it. On the way home, the secretary asks this rabbi, says, "Can you explain to you what went on over here? Suddenly you're buying a watch for your wife, and like, yeah, what happened over here?" He says, very simple. He says, "Yesterday I was walking by that store, and I heard this conversation that he was having with his wife, and he was calling kind of a little aggravated with his wife, and he was saying, you know what? You sit here, you're good for nothing. You're not really doing anything. You're not really a help." He was like kind of like getting upset with his wife. So he decided, you know what? He has to go into that store and not just buy a watch. He has to ask his wife's opinion. That's a sensitivity we have to have for another person. I just want to conclude with one last little incident that happened with the Rebbe, where the Rebbe would come and pray on Friday afternoons in the small little shul upstairs next to his office, the smaller crowd, and he would daven, pray the afternoon prayer at 3:15 every Friday. And people noticed something very interesting because generally, when the Rebbe would sit by his place during the repetition of the Amidah, the Rebbe usually had his hand on his forehead and would look into the siddur and was like kind of sit or stand like this with his hand on his forehead, kind of like extra concentration, blocking his eyes, whatever it was. But then suddenly people noticed that certain weeks the Rebbe would do it, and certain weeks the Rebbe would not. And it could have been like whatever, who cares, right? Some days you set the gas up, but for the Rebbe, it was like for so many years, everything was so precise. So people would kind of notice, wait, now suddenly the Rebbe is not holding his hand on his forehead. Until someone felt that they cracked the code. It was like an interesting mystery almost. People like kind of wondering, like why sometimes yes, sometimes not. Some people felt like this. There was this man in the community. I think his name is Shimon. Passed away, I think, recently. And Shimon had an incident when he was young. He was in I think, a house fire, and something happened to his face that got burnt. And he survived the fire. However, his whole face became like deformed, so to a degree where it was literally hard to look at him. And I saw pictures of this person. It was swollen. It wasn't symmetric. It was his eye. It just like it was very difficult to look at this person. A normal person survived the fire, living in life, but it wasn't just a little scar. It was hard to look at the person. And this person moved into the community and started sometimes davening with the Rebbe's minyan on Friday afternoons. And people noticed that whenever he was in the room, the Rebbe wouldn't put his hand up. When he wasn't there, the Rebbe would sit like this. But when he was there, the Rebbe wouldn't sit like this. So people came to the conclusion, and it makes a lot of sense, that the Rebbe was sensitive to this person, knowing how a lot of people, I'm sure he had those interactions, or he notices when people look at him for the first time, their, their reaction, which is obviously uncomfortable for the person. And perhaps the Rebbe didn't want this person to even think that the Rebbe is putting up his hand over his eyes in order not to look at him. So this went on for months. And it was like exactly like a science. Any time that he was in the room, the Rebbe's hand was down. When he wasn't there, the Rebbe's hand was up. The sensitivity to another person. This is what the Torah teaches us. You can't deceive a person with money, in business. You also can't deceive them. You have to be careful with the words that you use when you speak to them, the topics you bring up, the way you say something, the sensitivity that we have to have to another person. That's another mitzvah. And especially this time where we have to have an added dose of Avos Yisrael, sensitivity to others, unity, achdus. In general, this time of year, especially with all that's going on with the Jewish people in Israel and around the world, we have to have the unity. We have to have that relationship, the strong bond that we need from one to another. And through that, hopefully, we'll only hear good news from around the world, out of Israel. Let it be the big good news, the coming of Mashiach. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you for joining us. Have a Shavua Tov, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rahman. Take care. Have a good week. Bye,
All
everybody.
the best. Take care.